Hello, I'm Sandra Steving. I'm joined here by Andy Stanford-Clark, who's the CTO of IBM UK and Ireland. We're going to jump straight into a discussion today about a really fascinating project that IBM has underway called Mayflower. So in practice, it's all about AI-enabled autonomous shipping, which, given the importance of shipping to global trade, is a fascinating topic in and of itself. But actually, there are some really fascinating lessons here that touch on some key themes that are running throughout the day. Like, for example, how can a large organization really drive impactful innovation, or how sometimes finding the right partner can actually be a catalyst for achieving certain outcomes within a business. And hopefully this is also, as Andy's going to outline, a primer for how we can build some real world use cases for some really cutting edge tech. So let's jump in. Andy, tell us a little bit about the Mayflower Project and how this whole idea came to be.
Hi Sandra. Yeah, this is a really exciting project. We got invited to join the partnership with a number of other companies led by Primari, which is the company that's making the Mayflower Autonomous Ship a couple of years ago. And to us it was a golden opportunity to try out a whole load of AI technologies and cloud technologies, edge technologies, Internet of Things, a whole load of different technologies all coming together in one very high-profile, exciting project. So as a vehicle for trying out some ideas, it just seemed like a perfect partnership for us.
So in some autonomous shipping is necessarily a big focus area for IBM initially. Tell us a little bit about how you identified this opportunity and how you got involved with this project.
IBM is such a huge company working across many different countries, and we're involved in many different things. A lot of people have assumed that we are just IT providers to large banks, which is a big part of our business, but we do so many other things as well. In particular, cutting edge and leading edge stuff through our research organizations, which means that we can get involved in emerging technologies, and being a technology company, always being on the lookout for something which is going to be that bit different. And we always like a challenge as well. I mean, it's something, if it's too easy, somebody else would have done it. So we can bring the power of IBM, which really, when everybody works together across all our different divisions, different countries, it's a very powerful machine indeed. And we saw the Mayflower Project as first of all, a celebration of the 400 years of the Mayflower sailing across the Atlantic from the UK to the US, which is very sort of symbolic and celebrating this year. But the whole idea of an AI captain driving a boat really does sort of ring some nice bells, because there are many applications for the shipping industry and for water taxis, and the whole autonomous vehicle thing. People are talking a lot about autonomous road vehicles, and that's a really hard challenge, whereas autonomous shipping is actually somewhat simpler because things don't move so quickly. You don't get people, a mother with a pushchair rushing in front of a boat, stepping off the pavement. So although the challenges are similar, it's a lot more tractable, and we think it can be done. So we think there's a lot to be learned. The whole ship itself is a science experiment, and the sailing from the UK to the US is a sort of symbolic maiden voyage, but it's really the beginning of a whole program of research voyages, gathering data from the ocean, which is very expensive to do for crewed vessels with people on board for long periods of time, because they have to have food and somewhere to sleep, and they get bored and they have to be paid, whereas the AI captain on board Mayflower will just be going up and down and can go and seek out interesting things to gather data from out in the ocean.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've seen obviously a lot of disruption in global trade in the last couple of months in particular. One of the things I find really interesting about this project is it's actually the reverse of a lot of the scenarios that we typically see. At least in my world, most of the time I'm seeing startups bringing really cutting edge technology into the world of incumbents and enabling those businesses to do something new they wouldn't have been able to do with a startup. This is actually the flip side of that. You are working with a much smaller organization and bringing some of IBM's technology to really enable something new. So can you tell us a little bit about how it happened and how you kind of engineered the business so that you were able to really offer that value into a smaller organization?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, Promari reached out to us initially because they'd seen our Watson AI technology and thought, this looks like what we want. However, we're not just giving them products off the shelf. We're really offering them technology in three areas. First of all, on board the ship, what we call edge computing. So the technology that will be working autonomously, disconnected from the world on times when we can't get a satellite connection to and from the boat. There's all the technology in the cloud on the mainland, which we're using to train the AI models. And here we're taking advantage of our Power AI technology, which has got lots of GPUs and huge memory and the ability to really technology that's really optimized for training large machine learning models in a sensible amount of time, so we can take on board huge amounts of data, like all the image processing that we're doing of objects in the sea, which the AI captain can now identify and say, oh yeah, that's a boat, that's a seagull, that's an iceberg, from the shapes it's been taught by the AI model. And the final thing we're bringing to the table is expertise, because this isn't, you can't just buy a product and this stuff all works. This is complicated stuff. So we've got teams of people in different parts of our organisation who are working alongside Promari to make use of the IBM technology in new and interesting ways to kind of bend it a bit out of shape to move into this new market area. And it's really been that sort of trinity, if you like, of technology, expertise, working with Promari, which has enabled this to happen. And I think really that Promari took the view that there wasn't really another company that had the breadth and depth that IBM has to provide that technology to this solution. So as far as we know, and they keep saying it, they're very happy with what both the technology and the expertise that we're bringing to the project. And we find it very exciting because it's quite often small companies are able to be a lot more agile and nimble. I think about the velociraptors rushing amongst the T-Rexes. The T-Rexes are lumbering along, and the velociraptors are rushing along, getting the early pickings. Yeah. And in this case, we're able to capitalize on Promari's agility whilst providing them the really solid technology. So this is a very effective way of us getting into a new market sector.
Yeah, it's a really inspiring example, because not only are you using a lot of really cutting edge technology, you're having to force those technologies to interact with each other in extremely adverse environments that are somewhat unpredictable, really, until you sort of fully embark on this journey. So you talked a little bit about how you've got this partnership off the ground and what specific things you were able to bring to the table to enable this. Are there any key lessons that you've taken away from this, either in terms of future partnerships where you might be deploying some of these cutting edge technologies again, or maybe in a different context, that might be useful for other companies that are thinking about exploring some of these types of partnerships with technology businesses?
Yeah, I think it's been very valuable for us to take the view that there's a lot of value in the publicity around this. It's tempting to say, it has to be a funded project with budget set aside for it, but we found sort of cunning ways within IBM of finding nooks and crannies to get resource and to get technology that we can use for this project, sort of fueled by the knowledge that this is a really high-profile, high-visibility project. And it's the media attention that we're getting at the moment is worth its weight in gold in terms of telling people about artificial intelligence and some of the other technologies on board the boat, because it's very difficult to explain to people what AI is. It seems quite abstract, whereas here it's very clear that the AI captain is running the boat, is steering the boat, deciding what to do next, and we can paint the picture of the AI captain in action. So I think the biggest thing we've learned is to really sort of go in head first into these relationships and don't try them and run them at arm's length. We have a very close working relationship with Primari and some of the other partner companies, so that together we're making this project into a great success.
And so we've touched on it a couple of times, this idea of this pioneering technology that you're deploying live on this project. Can you tell us a little bit more about the specific technologies that are coming into play, and also how they've come together in new ways to enable that transition from, we've seen automation in shipping, but not a lot of true autonomy, and how you've actually managed to make that happen within this project?
Yeah, exactly. Firstly, the Watson AI technology is the eyes and ears, well, not the ears, but just the eyes of. Should I start that response again? The IBM the ABM. I can speak now. The IBM AI technology on board the ship is really the eyes of the boat. So the Mayflower has forward-looking and sideways-looking cameras, and as I mentioned before, we've trained this up over the last couple of years to recognise all kinds of shapes of things in the sea in front of it and around it. And this is fed into the AI captain's brain, which is a piece of AI technology which is not IBM's. This is Primari's intellectual property, which processes data from a number of sources. So from the eyes, the vision processing system, radar, and also AIS, which is the data feed coming from boats that they send out. And it also knows where it wants to go, and it also has access to weather from the weather company, which is one of IBM's companies, which is sent to it on a periodic basis when we can get a data connection to the boat. And the combination of those things are taken by the captain to say, right, I want to steer this course. It then hands over the proposed course to another IBM component called Operational Decision Manager, ODM, which is a rules-based system in which we've encoded the collision regulations. So this is like the highway code for the ocean. So it's where you must kind of pass right to right and power give ways to sail, and all those rules that we've kind of notionally know and sailors have to know, particularly captains of large vessels have to be absolutely abiding by the rules of the road. And the operational decision manager takes the proposed course, runs it through the collision regulations and says, okay, well, what you've proposed goes in front of that boat, but actually the rules say you've got to go behind that boat so it doesn't roll over you. So what we're actually giving you back is a modified route, which is that way then that way, instead of that way then that way. And the AI captain then has to abide by that and say, okay, yeah, I'll accept that, and then actuates that route by steering the boat on the course that's been sent back to it. So those are the main technologies. And the interesting part here is where we've got machine learning together with a rules-based system working together to steer the boat. And the advantage of the rules-based system is completely deterministic and explicable. So explainability is a really big issue in AIs. How did the computer come up with the decision that it made based on the data, the historical data that it had learned from? And this is one of the causes of people to be reluctant to take on board AI systems. But with an explainable system, we can have an auditable log of exactly what happened. So in the event, hopefully not, but in the event something goes wrong, we can say, well, the reason it took that decision was because it took this path through the rule system. And that interplay of machine learning systems and sort of deterministic rules-based systems, I think is very exciting, and that's going to have a lot of knock-on effects into not only industrial automation, but also into business automation, robotic process automation systems for enterprises as well.
So obviously there's a lot of companies, I'd imagine, in the audience today who've been sitting on the sidelines and watching the evolution of some of these things, as you said, sort of rule-based systems that have been a limiting factor, or the lack thereof have been a limiting factor for some businesses to jump in. So a lot of companies have been waiting for use cases, for a sense that they can wade into some of these spaces without huge regulatory concerns, etc. What are some of the lessons that you have I guess, as IBM for companies that are really ready to start trialing some of these technologies, and are now seeing that the viability and the use cases are there to really get going?
Well, we're seeing a lot of interesting large use cases which potentially could be transformational for businesses, but I can understand the reluctance of people to say, well, we're going to take this huge step forward. So my advice, and what I talk to my clients about, is to find a small area of the business in which you can try out this somewhat in isolation to the core of the business, so that first of all you can determine a business case for what's the benefit to this particular part of the business without the sort of entwining of it into the core of the business, but also that you can measure the return on investment. So you could say, this part is clearly segregated from the main business, so that we can measure the sort of advantage and disadvantage of using this new technology. So the advantage of that is you kind of pick some low-hanging fruit, something that's an obvious use case and quite a small one. So it's tangible, it can be achieved in a sensible amount of time, you can measure the return on investment in a sensible amount of time. And that enables you to decide then whether to make a recommendation to the board to whether to go into this technology in a bigger way. Good example of this is blockchain, where we're seeing a lot of use cases, particularly in the shipping industry. We have a system called TradeLens, which allows boats going into a port to exchange all the bills of lading and the customs documents electronically and in a verifiable, open way, such that it's non-disputable after the fact. And this it massively speeds up the processes of a boat coming into port. And imagine the benefits to an autonomous vessel like Mayflower coming into a future autonomous port, and we're talking to a number of different ports around the world who are starting to look at autonomous operations. Imagine that the autonomous boat sails into autonomous port and the documents are all transferred electronically, all put onto the blockchain for confirmation and immutable logging, so that it can never be disputed afterwards. And then the actual mechanics of how the digital twin on board the boat interacts with the digital twin of the port to say, this is the information we need to exchange in order for Mayflower to sail into one of the docks and start to unload its cargo. Those are really exciting research projects that we're looking at now. So the coolest thing is that this project touches on so many different areas of technology: edge computing, Internet of Things, weather, AI that we've talked about, cloud computing, digital twin, blockchain. It's all in there in one big project.
Yeah, and I think being able to really mark a step change in this space is interesting. We've been waiting for full autonomy in vehicles for a while, or at least really deployed. It seems like the ocean gives a different environment to do that. So obviously, there's a very exciting future in this space, and I saw the number that about 80% of all global trade goes through shipping channels in some capacity. And you're obviously talking not just about autonomous ships, but ultimately fully autonomous infrastructure. So what's the big vision behind something like this? What kind of vision do you have as IBM in this particular environment, and how do you envision the path to scale? Right, this is still an experimental phase, but it seems that a lot of the right things are coming together for this to potentially get to the next level.
Yeah, and so I think the point I just made about taking baby steps first, carving out a small project you can work on, then working out how to scale it. I think it's going to be a long journey. I think the transition to autonomous shipping is going to be a very long one. I think what we'll see first is an intermediate stage, in the same way as we're going to see with autonomous cars, is that it will augment the capability of the captain. So it'll be almost like a little sort of guardian angel looking over his or her shoulder, saying, "Yeah, look out for look out for that iceberg," or "There's a boat over here," or "There's a storm coming which you haven't spotted." So it's really to kind of give a safety driver, if you like, alongside the main captain to the human captain, to just kind of keep an eye on them and hopefully avoid collisions at sea, because that's the biggest thing if you're driving a tanker, is running something over, because they're very big and hard to stop. So I think that's going to be the transition phase. I think we're going to see a lot of semi-automatic stuff where, for example, if a boat's maybe doing a particular part of a route, same way as planes get put on after takeoff and before landing, the bit in between is the easy bit, so they kind of switch on the autopilot. I think there'll be times when the autonomic systems can take over there. But I think there's a huge potential for things like autonomous water taxis and modes of transport that we haven't really imagined yet because it would be too expensive to have crews on board. And this idea of research vessels gathering data out in the ocean, I can imagine whole fleets of Mayflower-like vehicles, vessels going out into the ocean, gathering data from parts of the ocean that we haven't explored before, looking for things like microplastics and chemicals in the water that we can't afford to spend months at sea looking for. So I think there's a huge industry shift there in terms of the amount of data we can gather, the knowledge we can get from that, and the way that will inform policies for governments and move forward the science in terms of understanding of climate change and the effects of the pollution in the ocean on mammals and fish, and how that's kind of going to change our future world. That we can't do that without data. We're kind of running blind if we're not informed by data. And I see these autonomous ships in their first incarnation as being these data gathering sensors.
Absolutely, and that's very much at the heart of the Mayflower's mission, and it's actually an aspect that I'm sure people would be quite interested to learn more about. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's next for the Mayflower? People are going to be curious to follow its journey and sort of understand how they can actually learn more about this initiative, and in particular some of those environmental aspects that you just touched on, which are hugely important.
Yeah, so the Mayflower has a number of research pods, experimental pods inside the hold. That's a 1 meter cubed experimental bays. There are a number of those being populated for the initial voyage. The trip across the Atlantic has actually been moved out to next April. Because of COVID and everything, the program's been delayed slightly, and then you run into winter. So the transatlantic crossing is going to be in April next year. But in the meantime, we're going to do some local journeys, maybe going up to Harwich, which is where Mayflower was originally built, maybe sailing around the Isle of Wight, where I live, which would be rather fun, looking out the window and waving at it, really to try out and sort of bed down some of the technology that we're going to be putting onto the boat for these experimental bays, because although the company that's building the boat is very familiar with these kind of marine systems and the electronics and the computer systems, and making them ruggedized and the adverse environment that you tend to find in the sea. Those of us who are experimentalists on workbenches in labs aren't quite so familiar with that, so it's a good chance to sort of shake down the technology and try it out. So the official launch is the 16th. That's going to be the naming ceremony in Plymouth, and then after that there'll be some local journeys around the UK, and then the main voyage in April next year, and then who knows what. I mean, the main purpose is to gather data for experimental purposes, so we'll be working with a number of research organisations who want to run missions to see where the next journeys might be. The people who are building the boat have a vision of potentially doing all the way around the Earth, a global navigation at some point. I don't know if they'll manage to do that, but imagine the data coming from that. It's going to be really exciting. And back on land, we can monitor the progress of the boat through the digital twin and explore the data that's being generated as and when it's able to get a connection and send it to us. So really exciting times ahead.
Wonderful. I'm pretty sure that people will have additional questions for you, Andy. Is there some way they can reach you in the next couple of days as part of London Tech Week?
Absolutely. So head over to the virtual IBM booth where there's a chatbot where you can ask a question, and if you target it at me, it will be passed through the magic of our chatbot infrastructure to my phone, and I will gladly answer it. I'd be more than happy to engage with discussion about it, because it's a really exciting project, and I'm sure it's bound to generate questions, particularly from people who think of business uses for the technology. So I'd be more than happy to talk about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.